Hello and welcome to video 15 in my Rigging in Maya series. Previously, in video 14, we explored blend shape creation as we built the main shapes we need to animate this guy's face. What we're going to do now is connect the controls to these shapes, in effect driving them, while also making for a simpler and more user-friendly experience for the animator. Now before we dive in, I just wanted to mention that you can now download all the source files for each part of this Rigging in Maya series from my CubeBrush page. You can find the link in the description below. While you're there, why don't you grab some of the other tutorials, models or rigs I have on offer. Most are free, but if you would like to help contribute to these videos, all donations are welcome. Alternatively, if you enjoy these videos, why not simply treat me to a coffee as a way of saying thank you? Just head to coffee.com/antCGi. Supporters now get exclusive rewards and early access to videos, not to mention a private invitation to my very own Discord channel. Also keep an eye out for this, popping up throughout the video. When it does, it means that as an added bonus, I've written and uploaded a script which will help speed up that particular area of the rigging process. Right, let's dive in. Here we have the scene, pretty much where we left off previously. The jaw is still joint driven to give us maximum freedom of movement, and so are the eyelids and the eyes. I think these are always better controlled with joints rather than blend shapes. If you select the head, you will see that we have our blend shape node, head_BS, and all the target shapes we created previously, just waiting to be rigged. If you open the shape editor, you can also see them all in here too. We have all the shapes which we can adjust and animate if we wanted to. What we need to do now is make these controls drive the blend shapes. So this will affect the lip. This one will work the sneer shape, and this will puff out the cheek. The global mouth control will need a different approach, so the lips will follow it. Let's start by looking at the cheek, and this setup can also be applied to many of the other controls. It's quite simple really. Open the node editor. Just move this over. Let's bring in the cheek control and remove the shape node. Select the head model and then the head blend shape node and bring those into the node editor too. We'll remove these because we don't need them. If we expand the head blend shape node, you will find the weight attribute. Expanding this will reveal all the blend shape targets. So here is the left cheek shape. Let's expand the control and the translate attributes. We want the blend shape to be controlled by the Controls Z translation. So let's connect that to the left cheek blend shape target. If we select the node, you can see in the channel box that it's tagged yellow, meaning it has an incoming connection. If we move this control now, you will see the cheek does expand, but we have a problem where the control has to move quite far before anything happens. It just moves too far away from the cheek. This is because the translation value is too small, so we need a way to increase it. Let's delete this. Press Tab and start to type multiply, and then select the multiply divide node. Call this cheek BS multi, so we know what it's used for. Just expand these. Oops. Here we have input 1, which is the primary number we want to work with. Below it is input 2, which is the value we want to multiply or divide the primary number by. Over here we get the result. We know we want to work with translate z, so connect that to input 1x. With nodes like this, the XYZ is irrelevant really. It could also be 1, 2, 3 or RGB as it is in some cases, so don't get too hung up on the attribute names. Again, we can see up here that it's connected. Now connect output X to the left cheek attribute. If we edit this now, nothing much happens because the multiply divide node is only multiplying the translate value by 1, so it's the same result. We need to change input 2x because this is a value which the translation is being multiplied by. So input 1x is being multiplied by input 2x and then output is the result. Let's try 10. Okay, that moves more, but not enough. Let's try 20 instead. That's closer, but I think we can go further. We need it to look more like the control is actually pulling the cheek geometry. What we can do is scrub the value until the cheek is in the right position. That's much better, so let's round that up to around 35. Okay, looking good. And you notice we can also push the cheek in as well as pull it out using just the one blend shape. Let's reset that. We can connect the opposite cheek now and use the same multiply divide node. It has 3 inputs after all, so there's no point in adding a new node. Bring the right cheek control into the node editor and remove the shape node. Let's open this up. We need translate Z again. Just move these around. Connect translate Z to input 1Y this time. Now we need output Y because we are working on the Y attributes. Connect that to the right cheek blend shape. Let's also make sure the input to Y attribute is the same so we get the same movement. There we go, that cheek works. We can now select and animate both cheeks at the same time. So those are now done. I told you it was a simple setup. Let's look at the lips next. With these controls, we can use exactly the same approach. I'll just close this for now. The difference is we want this control's Y translation to trigger the blend shape, not the Z translation. Because this is a simple but repetitive task, I've created a handy little script for you to download, which will automate this process. Here it is. So this will scan the scene for the blend shape nodes and list them all here. We only have the one in this scene, so that's already set for us. If I first select the middle control, we can choose which axis will drive the blend shape. We only need Y for now, so disable X and Z. The Connect Y checkbox ties into the Y-driven blend shape drop-down box. This is where you specify which blend shape target the Y translation will drive. This needs to be changed to lips upper middle. We also have the scale multiplier, and this just sets the amount the translation is multiplied by, just as we did previously with our multiply divide node. Actually, let's change that to 35, as we were using previously. Click Go, and that's connected. If we try it, we can see that the lip needs to move more. What this script also does is add an attribute to the control, so you can edit the amount the translation is multiplied by. It just connects to the multiply divide node, so it's easier for the animator to access. Let's scrub that so the lip is roughly in the right place. Okay, 70 works. That's better, much closer to the control's movement. Let's look at the lower lip now. Actually, let's just change the scale multiplier to match the upper lip control. So we'll change this to 70. Select the lower lip control, and we need to change the blend shape it will drive. So this should be lips lower middle. And click go. So the lip has moved but in the wrong direction. As you can see, we have the opposite movement. This is easily fixed though. We just need to change the multiply amount to a negative number. So change this to -70 instead. There we go, that's fixed. The middle controls are wired up. So now, with the help of this script, we can quickly go through the rest. Select the left outer lip control. Change the blend shape to match. Where are you? There you are, left lip upper outer, and click go. That's done. Now onto the corner. So change this to left lip upper corner and add that. So you get the general idea of how this script works. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly speed around and do all the rest and get them set up. Okay, that's the upper and lower lip controls set up. If we raise the upper lip, you see we have that nice uniform shape which we spent time creating in the previous video. We can do the same with the lower lip too. The corner controls, just like the mouth control, need to be set up differently, but we will come back to those later. Let's move up to the sneer control. So we need to change this to sneer 2. Oh, wrong shape, just undo that. Set this to sneer, not squint. Let's reapply that. That's better. Now we can do the squint. Okay, that's done. Move over to the opposite side. Do the sneer. And the squint. So those were easy enough. And if you don't have this script, just refer back to see how the network was created. It would make sense for us to now redo the cheeks, just so everything is set up the same with the same attributes added onto the controls. Open the node editor again, and the cheek nodes should still be here. Yep, so just delete the cheek BS multinode. That frees up the cheek control again. Let's just close that. We just want this attribute on here like the other controls. With this control, we need the Z translation to drive it, so deselect Connect Y and instead enable Connect Z. Because we are working on the Z channel, we need to focus on this drop-down box. Change this to left cheek and click Go. That's done. Hop over to the right cheek. Change this to right cheek and apply that. That's done too. Let's look at the nose next. With this control, we need to work with two of the axes, Y and also Z. We have two blend shapes to work on in this area, the nose raise and the nose stretch. Change Y-driven blend shape to nose raise. We don't need the X-axis to do anything, so uncheck that. And now set Z-driven blend shape to nose squash. With this control, we need to work with two of the axes, Y and also Z. This is because we need the nose to move in two directions, so we can activate the nose raise and also the nose squash blend shapes. Click Go again, and that's now added both directions, and we have two multi-attributes to play with. Let's try that. So the nose squash is inverted, so we need to fix that. Nose raise looks good though. Let's change Z multi to -100 instead to fix that movement. That's better. We can now pull the nose around, although looking at it we could probably add in another shape to move it left and right too. This is what I mentioned in the previous video. Sometimes it's better to work with these controls wired up, so you get a better idea of what shapes are needed. The good thing is we can easily add in another blend shape target and then connect it up to the control later. So I think that's what I'll do at the end of the video, so you'll be able to see this when you download the source files. Okay, those are the basic controls connected, so let's look at the corner of the mouth. We can't just rely on one direction for the corner of the mouth. If we look at the shapes we have a wide shape, a raise and a lower, and also, if I can find it, a narrow. All four of these need to work off this one control. Let's go back to the node editor. We don't need the cheek controls anymore, so let's remove those and bring in this corner control. Just arrange these. This time we're going to use a condition node first. So press Tab and create one. Rename that to left mouth corner condition. Actually, let's change that. Wide. That makes more sense. Open these attributes. And open the attribute editor so we can see it a little clearer. If you followed along with this series, you will have a good idea of how this node works, but I'll go over the basics for any new viewers. We want the X translation to drive both the wide and narrow shapes. So, connect translate X to the first term attribute on the condition node. We can see this is now connected over here. So what this will do is compare the first term with the second term and check them against the current operation. We need this to be set to greater than, because we are checking when the first term is greater than the second term. I'll just move the control so we have a value to work with. If the first term is greater than the second term, the condition node will use the colour if true value here. If it isn't, it uses the colour if false value. So let's also connect the translate X attribute into this, as this value will also drive the blend shapes. We need to use the outColorR attribute because that represents the first row here. Connect outColorR to left lip wide. If we try the control now, we can see it's working. Yes, there is a bit of a jump, but that's expected when we go into negative figures. What we can see is a corner moving slightly when we are in positive figures, just as we had with the other blend shapes. So we need to multiply the value again to increase their movement. First, let's stop that jumping. This is because when the first term isn't greater than the second term, so when it's less than the second term, The output is coming from the color if false attribute instead, and this is set to 1. So the blend shape is automatically being set to 1 as well. So this is why we are getting that snap. We don't want this. Instead, when the value isn't greater, we need the blend shape to be turned off. So let's set that to 0. So now you see we only have movement when the control goes in a positive direction. Let's create that multiply divide node I mentioned earlier. And rename that so it's the same as a condition node but with multi on the end instead, just so we know that they're both connected. Connect the out color R to input 1x and output x to the left lip wide blend shape. This is set to 1 by default, so we now need to increase how much this value is multiplied by. So scrub the attribute to get a basic number. Okay, 80 looks good. Just round that off. Just because I prefer nice neat numbers and they are easier to remember. That works. I can now pull the corner of the mouth out. Also, unlike the other controls like the lips and the cheeks, when I move in the opposite direction, nothing happens. But this is exactly what we need. Rather than the blend shape going into negative figures, what we want instead is to trigger a different blend shape. So in this case, it will be the lip narrow. So rather than set up a new network, we can use the same nodes. In the attribute editor, you can see on the condition node, there are 3 columns. So we can simply use the second one here. Connect translate x to color if false g. By doing this, what we are saying is that if the first term isn't greater than the second term, so it's less than, it's going to use this false value instead. So we can use this to trigger another blend shape. Because we are using the second column, we need the second output, so connect outColor G to input 1y. Again, we are using the multiply divide node to control how much this value affects the blend shape. Connect output y to left lip narrow. Let's also update input to y with the same value as we used before. Okay, so that looks wrong, but it's because we are inputting a negative value, which is coming from the X translation into the blend shape. So the vertices are moving in the wrong direction. We can easily fix that by setting 80 to -80 instead. Okay, there we go. The corner of the mouth now moves in and out, each direction triggering a different blend shape. So let's recap. When the first term is greater than the second term, which is being defined by the operation, the condition node uses the true value here, so the wide blend shape is being set to this, whereas the narrow is using this value here. If the first term is not greater than the second term, the value changes. So the wide shape uses this value instead and is set to 0, whereas the narrow is then set to use this value and starts to move. I know, it's a lot to think about, but the best thing to do is play around with it and experiment. It makes more sense when put into practice. That's the wide and narrow done. Let's now look at raise and lower. This is exactly the same setup, except we use the Y translation instead of X. Duplicate the condition and multiply divide nodes. And let's remove these from the node editor. Move this down, open it. Also rename it to raise. And open these. And do the same with this node. So we need the Y translation. Connect that to the first term attribute. Let's just organise these. Again, when the first term is greater than the second term, we want to use the colour if true value here. So connect translate y to colour if true r next. Just move these again. We are just repeating the same connections we did with the wide and narrow. So outColor r goes to input 1x on the multiply divide node. The good thing about duplicating nodes is they retain the same settings and values, so at least we don't need to go in and set those up again. Now output x to left lip raise. That jumps up now because the blend shape is now active and we have the multiply value already set. That works. As you can see, the movement is now more fluid because with the one control we can automatically combine multiple blend shapes. Let's set up the lower next. If you remember, we need to use the second column, which is the G or green column. So translate Y goes into colour if false G. We now need the output from the G column. Connect that to input 1Y and output Y to left lip lower. You can see that's worked because the lip moved. We can now pull the corner of the mouth around, triggering 4 blend shapes at once using just this one control. It looks more fluid and it's a lot easier for the animator to just pick up and start animating. This setup can be used on lots of things, not just blend shapes. I've used it many times before to simplify a foot rig, for example, so moving the one control can activate the foot roll and bank, again making it more user-friendly for the animator. It gives them physical controls to use rather than them having to hunt down and play around with attributes. So, time to work on the other corner of the mouth. Just reset these first. The process is exactly the same, so I'm just going to speed up the video here. If you're not entirely sure what to do, just go back and re-watch the section where we do the left corner of his mouth and just repeat that process for the right corner of his mouth. At this stage, it's more about remembering which attributes are connected to which, and if you duplicate the condition and multiply divide nodes, you don't need to worry about seeing the values. So that's raise and lower done. Now onto the wide and narrow shapes. I'm thinking that I might try and update the script I used earlier with an option to automatically create this setup for you too. What do you think? If you would like to see this, please let me know in the comments below and I'll see what I can do. So there we go, the right side done too. Both sides rigged. Now you have that process nailed, you can move on and apply it to the global mouth control here. Duplicate the condition and multiply divide nodes. Hide these for now, and the corner control too. And bring the mouth control into the node editor. Open that up. And we'll just rename these. As this is a global control, we don't need the R at the beginning. Actually, let's change the wide. Change that to left right. Update the multiply divide node too. Open these up. We want translate X to drive these shapes, so connect it to the first term. Move these again. If we remember previously, we also had to connect it to the colour if true R attribute and the colour if false G attribute. Connect those next. OK. Now the outputs go into the multiply divide node. So out colour R to input 1x and out colour G to input 1y. Where are you? OK, output X goes to lips left and output Y goes to lips right. Let's try that. OK, good. Both are working and in the right directions. Now to do the up and down shapes. Duplicate the nodes again and remove the ones we no longer need. Rename these now to up down and get rid of the one at the end. And open these. So, translate Y this time. We'll connect that to first term. Also connect it to colour if true R and colour if false G. Yep, that's right. Move the multiply divide node up. Out colour R to input 1x and out colour G to input 1y. So exactly as we did before. And finally, output X controls the lips up shape. And output Y controls the lips down shape. Just try that. Yeah, looks good. Unlike the corner of the mouth, this can move around anywhere and the lips will follow. So we have control over the whole mouth and each corner too. We can also fine-tune the lips too. They also work alongside the jaw movement. If you find that there's a particular combination of shapes that don't work, maybe like this, you can always go back into the shape editor, hit that edit button and use the sculpting tools to adjust them. The blend shapes can be reworked and tweaked as much as you like. It doesn't affect the face rig. It would only have an impact if you deleted a target or replaced it. But even then, it's just a case of reconnecting it to the right attribute and the right control. Okay, so the only area we have left to rig is the eyebrows. We want the inner and outer eyebrows to work off the Y translation. Because this is a simple movement, we could just use a script again, which, when moving the control directly, would work fine. The problem is we have this global control, which moves both the inner and outer eyebrow controls. If you remember, the way this setup in this script works is to use the actual translation values. If we raise the global control though, you will see the individual controls have no values, so they wouldn't trigger the blend shapes. What we need is a dummy object which will always have those translate values, regardless of which control is moving it. Create a locator. And parent constrain it to the left brow inner control. Turn off maintain offset so it inherits its position and orientation. Let's make it smaller. We could use the locator now to drive the blend shape, but the problem is it has transform values, so this wouldn't work. We need to clean it up. So let's delete that parent constraint node for now. Now go to Freeze Transforms. We only want to freeze the translations, so make sure Rotate and Scale are not checked. Click Apply. We now have nice clean values on the locator. Now constrain it again using another parent constraint so it follows where the control moves. Let's just rename that locator. So copy the control's name and replace control at the end with locator. If we move the control, the locator follows. The locator also has translate values. If we move the global control instead, you will see the control still has no values, but instead the locator does. So what this means is we can use the locator to drive the blend shapes instead of the control. Let's open the script again, but remember you can also do it manually if you don't have it. Just refer back to the beginning of the video. We just want to connect the Y translation, so disable X and Z. Y-driven blend shape should now be changed to left brow inner, and click Go. OK, that's done and connected. It works with the main control. And also the global control. Perfect. Let's do the outer brow. Duplicate the locator. And rename it to outer instead of inner. Select the outer eyebrow control and the new locator and go to Constrain Parent. Actually, we don't need to use a constraint. Instead, go to Modify, Match Transformations, Match All Transformations. This just does the same thing, but you don't have to go in and delete the parent constraint node afterwards. OK, I had them selected the wrong way around. Just undo that. Select the locator first and then the control, and this time just match the transforms. Next, match the rotations. We don't want to match the scale. Make sure you freeze the transforms to zero out the translation values on the locator. Now that's in position, you can use the parent constraint so the locator follows the control. That all moves correctly. Select the locator and in the window set Y-driven blend shape to left brow outer and click Go. Right, we have an error. This is because I duplicated the locator, so we also have the Y multi-attribute on it. I should maybe update the script to check for this. OK, let's delete those attributes and click Go again. Right, that's worked this time. We can now move the eyebrow as a whole and also individually. I'm going to repeat this now for the opposite side, so I'll pause the video here and I'll be back in a second. We now have both sides rigged, but the locators are sat outside the groups and we need them to be parented to the head control, just so they move around with it and they follow with the head. If we drag these up, you will see we have a problem. So what's happening here are the locators are having extra transform values applied to them because they are now inside a group. So this, in addition to the constraints, is causing an offset. It's not a big deal though. All we need to do is delete those parent constraints, freeze the transforms to zero the translation values back out, and then apply the parent constraints again so the locators follow the controls. Remember, you can also press G to repeat the last command. So rather than going to the menus each time, you can just use the shortcut to apply the constraint again to the selection. There we go, both eyebrows now working. The locators also follow the head too, just as we needed. We'll just test and play around with the mouth too. When working with blend shapes, it's always a good idea to test that the blend shapes work in conjunction with any skinning you've done. Okay, so I've skipped ahead slightly here. As you can see, I decided to use the Z translation on the mouth control to drive the pucker shape. Again, just using the script or the initial setup with the multiply divide node. What we need to do now is set up the lips clamp target shape. And the most logical way I can think of adding this is into the control scale attribute. That kind of makes sense to me. Because we are using the scale though, this needs a slightly different setup. Make sure you have the node editor open and the mouth control and blend shape nodes are loaded. As you can see, I also added a new mouth shape multi-node, which is there to help the pucker control. Connect scale Y to input 1Y. Also connect output Y to lips clamp. What you will see is the lips clamp shape becomes active, so the lips have closed, even though we didn't scale them. This is because the scale attribute has a default value of 1, not 0, so this is setting the blend shape to 1, as you can see here. What we need is an offset, one which will take away that value of 1, so it instead reads as 0. Press Tab in the node editor and create a plus/minus average node. We can use this to take away that initial value. I'll just open it in the attribute editor. What we need to do is set the operation to subtract because we want to take away that 1. Connect scale Y to input 1D0. This connection now shows up in the attribute editor. You should also see we now have input 1D1 below it. Connect scale Y to input 1D1 as well, so it's connected to both. Now select and delete the connection to input 1D1. The attribute will stay at its value of 1, which is the amount we need to subtract. We delete the connection because we don't want this value to change. Next, connect output 1D to input 1Y on the multiply divide node. You will see the lips return to the default pose because we took away that value, so the blend shape is back at 0 now. Let's test it. Okay, we need to invert it, but again, this is a simple task of setting the value we multiply it by to a negative value. So we could set that to -70 instead. Actually, the 70 was for the pucker. My bad. Okay, so it's the input 2Y we need to update. That's better. We can probably increase the influence. Maybe -2. Yeah, that looks better. Reset that. Oops, needs to be 1, not 0. So the mouth is working nicely now. I'll just rename that plus/minus average node before we move on. What we can also do is use this system so when we scale this control, the nostrils flare too. So it triggers this shape. Although thinking about it, this shape affects both sides, so we could remove those nostril controls and just have them flare when the nose control is scaled instead. You can always divide the nostril flare blend shape into 2 if you needed, and keep these controls so you can independently flare either side of the nose. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to repeat the process we did for the lip clamp, and we're going to add in that nostril flare. So again, I'll pause the video and I will be back in a minute. So here we have the nose. We can stretch it and move it up and down, and the scale now triggers the nostrils. We can move around the face now and literally pull areas around to help achieve different expressions. This normal map stretching needs fixing. Maybe an extra edge loop would help around here. I'll maybe come back and fix that later. Because a lot of these controls work off just one attribute, we could go in and lock off the rest, again simplifying things for the animator. If I select the brow controls, all I need to do is select all the attributes in the channel box apart from Translate Y. I can then right click and go to Lock and Hide Selected. We can now only edit this along that one axis. Let's do the same on the global controls. No matter where we move these now, they are restricted to just the Y axis. This just means the controls don't end up away from the head or across the scene. We could go around now and lock off all the other unused attributes to clean up the face controls. You can now pull all these around and start forming expressions. One thing we should do is make sure the lower lip controls follow the jaw, so they stay with the lip as the mouth opens. All we need to do is move all those offset groups and parent them to the jaw control instead. That's better, and it makes more sense for them to be there. So you've now seen how to set up a joint based facial rig and also a blend shape based rig, but which is better? To be honest, I prefer to use a mixture of the two. Blend shapes are ideal for creating more exact facial shapes, but they can be restrictive. Joints allow for much more freedom of movement and flexibility, but the shapes they produce may not be exactly the shapes that you need. So with the nose, for example, I would use a joint so that we can move it around, but then use blend shapes to flare the nostrils so I can get a more precise shape. With the eyebrows, joints would be better, and I would have 3 instead of 2. You can be more expressive that way, and to achieve the same results, you would need 2 blend shapes per area. So that would mean 12 in total, which could be expensive depending on what platform you're developing for, if this is a game model. Another plus side to blend shapes compared to joints is if you're creating phonemes. So if you're creating sort of an A, E, I, O, U shape, or more precise facial expressions. In this instance, blend shapes are absolutely the way to go, because you wouldn't be able to achieve these with joints, Not without using lots and lots of joints, that is. What I would do is experiment and see which works best for your particular character, as the setup on one character won't necessarily work best on another. Okay, that's the facial sections done now, and there's not many more videos left that I want to cover on this particular rig and this particular part of the series. What I want to cover over the next few videos are space swapping, making the rig scalable, and finally locking the rig down and cleaning it up so it can be passed to an animator and you're not worried about them accidentally breaking it or selecting and moving things that shouldn't be touched. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please let me know in the comments below. Also let me know if you have any questions and tell me what future videos you would like to see. Remember to download the files from my CubeBrush page so you can follow along with these tutorials. And why not say thanks with a small donation via my Ko-fi page. As always, remember to like this tutorial and subscribe to my channel to keep up to date with future videos. This is antCGi signing off, and I will see you on the next one.